Hey everybody, Avros here, back again with the Final Fantasy V gameplay here in the Final Fantasy XII game challenge. So we're back with the final episode here, the last battle of the game, up against Exdeath finally. Gonna take him on in the Void and put a stop to his evil plan to destroy, well, literally everything, by returning everything to the Void and ending all of existence. So Exdeath's true form finally revealed here in his tree form, and he's getting ready to fight us. And before he does so, he decides he's going to just void out every other critical location we've seen in the game and just basically ruin everything. So there goes Krile and Galuf's castle, the pirate cave along with Boko's wife there, the underground facility where Cid and Mid have been researching, and this really starts to frustrate Avros and the party, obviously, because Exdeath's been a massive thorn in their side, if you'll pardon the pun, all this time. And so he decides, you know what, we're gonna fight Exdeath, and Exdeath's like, nah, and voids out everybody. And, yeah, so won't make a joke here about this being end of the game, party's all dead, but the Void isn't as empty as it first appears when you see this, and someone flies by and tells Avros to stand up, and he gets up the rest of the party, and, it turns out that the person that asked him to stand up is his dad, Dorgan. And then we have Zazat, Kelga, and Galuf come back. So there's the Warriors of Dawn come back to save the Warriors of Light. And as Galuf says, they're End of the Dawn Warriors. And he basically tells them, you know what, they'll hold off the Void, and the Warriors of Light need to go and fight Exdeath. They're the only ones that can actually defeat him. But they'll stop the Void from spreading any further, so they have the opportunity to take out Exdeath. So their spirits come back and actually prevent the Void from eating the Warriors of Light, and Exdeath tries to get rid of them, and, you know, every time he shows up the Void, people show up to stop it, including now the King of Tycoon decides to back them up as well, and it's time for the Light Warriors to fight Exdeath. So here we go for the final battle. This is a really interesting fight. So the first form here of Exdeath, as you can see in his tree form, extending out all over the area where we're in here, and we're going to do a bunch of buffing for the first part of this fight. So using Avros's mix ability there to give himself a Goliath tonic to double his HP, making him a lot more resilient. And Exdeath only really has two attacks in this form. The first one he just used there is White Hole, which is a single target magical attack setting Death and Petrify on the target. And everyone in the party has equipped his stuff to basically make it so that they're immune to all status ailments, so that won't actually do anything at all. And the other thing he's got in this fight is a physical attack that hits decently hard, but nothing we can't deal with all of our spells. So what we're going to do here is just wail on Exdeath. You can see Faris and Krile just going all out with their abilities there, using stuff like dual cast Holy, and just getting our buffs up. Avros getting his Mighty Guard off there from Blue Magic to give everyone float and a bunch of damage reduction, and Lena's just gonna rapid fire the Spellblade there to do as much damage as possible, and wail on Exdeath with as much holy damage as we possibly can. So while we're going through all of this and getting everyone buffed up and getting as much holy damage onto Exdeath as possible, we're trying to minimize as much MP used as possible. Both Krile and Faris have gold hairpins on here to minimize their MP costs. It actually halves the cost of all spells that they cast, because this isn't the only part of Exdeath. You might have noticed I've said in this form a few times, this is where we start dealing with, you know, bosses with two separate forms in the Final Fantasy series. So, Final Fantasy IV, the final boss, Zeromus, when you kill him, or when he gets killed, sorry, I should say, by Golbez and Fusoya, he did turn into a different form that the party fought, and this is really the first game where the party actually fights both forms of the boss. So Exdeath, in the end, after taking a lot of damage, gets consumed by the Void, and says the Void was his to command, how could it turn back on him, and is fully consumed by the Void and dies. There's an interesting bug you can do in the game here that if you manage to set Berserk status on Exdeath, as I mentioned a few times previously, it breaks the game's scripting and this transformation doesn't happen and the fight just ends. This is one of the actual points in the game where the fight scripting bugging is actually a good thing if you're doing like a challenge run of some sort, because you can completely skip this part. So here comes Neo Exdeath. It says he's going to destroy all memories, dimensions, and existence, and they shall be returned to nothing, and then he too can disappear forever, so he's embraced the fact that he's going to just ruin everything. And here's our second form of this fight. He goes from Exdeath to Neo Exdeath, and because of the change in boss there, Avros ended up using his Dragon's Breath upon himself and hitting himself for his total HP and damage, because that's how that attack works. It hits for your max HP in holy damage. And now we're fighting Neo Exdeath. So Neo Exdeath has actually 4 different segments here with different health, and taking out the different segments will prevent the use of different attacks. And the back sort of form he's got there is actually able to be petrified and killed, the form that's commonly referred to as human, which is the 2 sort of like undead at the back. So really with this part, there's a lot of different stuff that Neo Exdeath can actually pull out. There's a lot of different attacks. He can be a massive pain when you're fighting him, especially due to his massive attacks he has, like Almagest and Grand Cross, which you really need to be careful about because they just hit super hard. So the best strategy for taking on Neo Exdeath is, of course, maximize your defensive buffs, which is why you put them up during the Exdeath portion of the fight. And then once you're done with that, utilize everything you possibly can to do as much damage as possible. So Avros was trying to hit with an anti-elixir there and kill human, which didn't work either. And the other option, of course, other than focusing on specific targets, is to go for multi-target attacks. So Odin there can actually one-shot human, but doesn't always work. So using Odin, he went for Gungnir. Not much point to continue using him here, but holy damage is still the most effective thing against Exdeath, so anything that does holy damage or something like Bahamut that does unaspected damage is your best bet. And Lena's just going to resort to that holy spell-bladed rapid fire the whole entire time. And here's Almagest. As you can see, that just did a lot of damage to everybody. Avros taking 1600 damage there, for example, who's got the weakest defenses in the party, sort of thing. So yeah, a lot of healing here. Having the white magic equipped on Kryl is allowing us to do dual cast Curagas, which is super handy. And then after Almagest, it actually sets the sap status and drains everyone's health. So yeah, not great. And yeah, Neo Exdeath likes to say stuff like the laws of the universe mean nothing to him. But we're just gonna continue on doing everything we possibly can here to just take him out. So stuff like what we're doing here with Faris and using Quick to get those extra spell casts in. And so, Quick and then using Bahamut and just spamming Bahamut is a really quick way of getting through this fight. As you can see, then Neo Exdeath tried to use Dispel on Avros to dispel all of his buffs. So yeah, you need to be very, very quick and get through this fight as efficiently as possible. With a party set up like we've got, then you can just go ahead and basically do what we're doing here, spam Bahamut, get those 3000 damages on each part, and just try and take out all of Neo Exdeath in one go, and not have to worry about too much of the special stuff that he can do. But typically you would try and take out the fight in a specific order if you weren't able to do all that AoE damage. So the best way to do it is to kill what they refer to as Magic Beast, which is the wolf head on his back. And once that's dead, you want to take out the human. And then once human is taken out, either with something like Odin or an anti-elixir, or if you have it, the Doom blue magic spell, then you want to focus on either Dragon, which is the sort of dragon's head at the bottom and the front, and then finally Vacuum, which is the big sort of horned head on his head there. These aren't official names for the segments, but just common names used amongst people that, write walkthroughs or do any sort of stuff that Kral's best spell in this situation for trying to hit multiple targets is to actually just cast Meteor, as Holy's only single target. So Meteor doing the random hits there, it works out fine enough, but it's not the most amazing damage, whereas Holy, if she double casts that, hits for about, as you can see there, 5,000 twice. So, as long as we're not too worried about what segment of Exdeath we're hitting, getting those double Holies off can be really powerful, but better off trying to rely on something like Bahamut or anything else we've got there. So, Exdeath's level is actually divisible by 3 on some parts, so level 3 Flare is a great blue magic spell for damage. Otherwise, the Chemist part of what we've got on Avaros is our best bet here, utilizing those mix abilities to do stuff like the Holy Dragon Breath or any other attacks we've got there. And yeah, just basically at this point, Exdeath just throws every single higher level spell and ability possible at you. Stuff like Flare, like I said, Almagest, Grand Cross, all these massive attacks. And so your best bet is just to do as much damage as possible, keep your health up, and deal with it as it happens. Vacuum Wave, another one of his very annoying abilities that he can possibly do. And yeah, as he likes to say, laws of the universe mean nothing, and he's just trying to wipe out the party, but we're not going to stop at this point. We're just going to continue our fight and take out Exdeath, same as we've taken out everything else. So, the other benefit of using Goliath Tonic on our Chemist is that he's also a blue mage, being Avaros, so that White Wind heals for equal to his maximum HP, and he's got twice as much HP as everybody else, so basically he can just top everyone up in a single White Wind and make sure nobody dies, as long as he's as close to maximum health as possible. So yeah, the rest of this fight plays out pretty standardly. We're just gonna deal damage, not die, and beat Exdeath. So you can see the head there, Vacuum, is actually dead, so we're not really too worried about getting hit by some of the annoying attacks it does now. And we just got to take out the remaining 3 sections and the fight will be over. So, something interesting that's about this this fight here is, obviously, being the last fight of the game, the next segment of the game sort of goes through the ending and the credits sequence, and I'm going to show that after this fight, obviously, but there's something that happens in the credit sequence and the ending that depends on something that happens actually in this battle. So when you beat Neo Exdeath, if any of your party members are dead, they don't come back. They basically lose their life fighting against the ultimate evil in the world and are lost. So what can actually happen is that does actually affect the ending, which is pretty interesting how it actually works, because what'll happen is their stories just basically end. You don't get to see any sort of post storyline events that would occur to them, and they're just gone for good. And so the best ending, obviously, is to keep everyone on the party alive. So that's something to keep in mind if you're ever actually doing this yourself, is to try and keep everyone alive as best you can, and focus on sort of keeping people up and healed more than necessarily doing damage if you want to see the ending with everybody in it. So, utilizing the Mimic ability here with Faris to get free Bahamut casts, because Mimic from the Mime class doesn't cost any MP, and yeah, just finishing up the fight here against Neo Exdeath. There shouldn't be too many hits left. It's not the shortest fight. There's been a bit over 10 minutes of just this fight on its own, but it's not the longest fight in the game. That would go to either the optional extra bosses in the GBA dungeon or the fight against Phoenix. I find always takes a lot longer. I didn't do that in this playthrough because it's annoying and I don't like the Phoenix summon personally, so I didn't bother. So that's it. Neo Exdeath is dead. And that's it. It's the final fight of Final Fantasy V. So all we have left here is a bit of a quick summary of what happens to everyone after defeating Neo Exdeath, and what happens to the world, which we're going to to sort of speed through here. And once we're all done with that, I'll give some thoughts on this this whole project and putting this all together. So, as it says in the beginning, there was only the void. But from the void came the four essences. They formed the crystals, and the world was born. So, Xdeath was right. The world did start in the void. So, returning the world to the void would have been correct. So, hope, earth. Courage was fire. Care and devotion was water. Knowledge was wind. If the void ever threatens to engulf the world, as long as the four essences still exist in man, the light will be reborn anew, and the four essences shall rise from the void and weave the light once again. So, like I said, Xdeath was right. The world did originally come from the void. So when he said he wanted to return the world to what it once was, he wasn't really lying. He was correct. But, you know, he exists in the world, so I don't understand why he'd want to destroy everything. But, you know, here we are. So the party finds themselves in the void, and they're kind of flying about, as you can see here. And so Avaros woke up Krile, and they woke up everybody together. And they're shocked to see that the void still exists, and they figure it's because all the crystals are gone, so the world will still be engulfed by the void. And they get pretty sad about it, only for Krile to get shot further into the void. And turns out she was carrying the shards of the earth crystal, and Hope blessed the earth. Faris, again, still carrying the shards of the fire crystal, was courage, so it lights the fires. And water there for Lena, and so water will be breathed life into by devotion. And lastly, Avaros, our main character, carrying the power of wind the whole time through, and so he's got passions which will spread knowledge upon the winds. So, you know, he had the wind crystal the whole time. We made him a white mage, and he casts white wind a lot to heal people. Sorry, a blue mage, I should say, not a white mage. So, you know, kind of amusing. And the shards of the crystal in the void and the power within them reforms the crystals. So you can see the one there in the pyramid for earth, behind the waterfall there for water, underwater there in the, you know, underwater temple for the fire one, and the void reverses and everywhere's returned back to the planet, and the world's being reborn. So by defeating Xdeath, as the prophecy said, as long as the power still existed in man, the crystal shards would reform the crystals and restore the earth and bring back light to the world. So, the heroes have done such a fantastic job taking care of the shards. They've restored everything, and they've rescued the entire world. So, now the wind will come back, water comes back, everything will be fine. You know, Earth will be fully restored, there won't be any stagnant water or anything like that we're worrying about. And the Warriors of Dawn show up, and King Tycoon says, yeah, the world still needs you guys, too early for you guys to be dead, you know, go on home. So they all disappear, their work here is done. They saved the world previously from Xdeath and sealed him until a time when the Light Warriors could show up and defeat him for good. So their spirits form a Windrake, so I don't know how 5 people become a dragon, but apparently if you get the spirits of 5 people together, you can make a dragon. So, you know, just file that knowledge away, and they jump onto the dragon, and they make it back home. So that part there in the void, if any of the characters were dead, they'd basically be like, yeah, I'm too weak, you guys go on without me, and wouldn't make it onto the dragon, and would be left behind in the void for good. So, Mid, there's the one calling out Grandpa, and he's got a letter, and so this is the part that sort of also changes based on who's still alive. So, as you can see here, the one that's writing the letter to them is Krile, saying they've made it back safely. If Kryle's dead, somebody else will write the letter, and other parts of this letter changes based on who is and isn't alive after the end of the Xdeath fight. So, considering we got the best ending here, not that it's too hard, as I said, you just gotta keep the party alive, make sure they're healed up, and so, yeah, she says, feels like the fight was a bad dream. And we see some shots of the areas we've been through, and Krile, Lena, Faris, and Bartz go to talk to the Moogles, and everything's gone back to being nice and peaceful, and Kryle's hanging out with the Moogle friends. Lena and Faris end up back in Tycoon Castle. The Chancellor's happy to have the princesses back, because it makes running of the kingdom easier. Faris, on the other hand, you know, worried about a pirate crew, and as she already said, she didn't really enjoy the princess life, so she just bugs off again, escapes through the window, and runs away. Everyone in Bhaal gets worried as there's nobody on the throne, because Galuf was the king and he's dead. So, you know, Kral says maybe she'll be queen, but as if, you know, it would be cool, but, I mean, I guess line of succession would go to her anyway. Aaravos goes back to his hometown, and just said, yeah, I'm gonna keep traveling, but I don't want to be away from my parents, I want to spend some time home again. And, here's Boko and his wife, and Coco, and she has, children, and there's little baby chocobos. And as Kral says, they're adorable. And, it's been a year since we've defeated Neo Exdeath, and everyone's, all happy, back to normal, and, you know, Kral says, you know, she's gone home. If anyone asks about her, you know, they'll go and find her again eventually, so don't worry about her. And so now we see some flashbacks of all the key moments. I don't know how Cid's imagining this, or if this is just flashbacks for flashback's sake, but you see a lot of badass moments here, so, you know, Aaravos beating up Kelgar, and, you know, I don't know if I kept this in the videos, but there's a weird scene where Aaravos and Galuf go and check on Faris while she's sleeping and find out she's a woman, or fall in love with her because she's really beautiful. So there's some badass moments of Aaravos's. Here's Lena's sort of highlight reel, so, you know, taking a poisoned arrow, getting poisoned walking over plants, having her sister laugh at her when they were staying at Tycoon Castle. I don't understand why Lena gets kind of crapped on here, but, I mean, I guess that's her badass moments. And then the first badass moment for Faris is her in a dress, and then Sildra dying. Weird. And then the last one is her being discovered as a woman in the boat. So, I guess? And then, yeah, Kral's first moment is getting her grandfather's headband after he dies. And then beating up Aaravos outside of the castle when we got combined worlds. And, her blowing up an entrance and just nuking the King of Tycoon in the Earth Temple when Galuf was still alive. So, I mean, at least she got some good moments there, but, you know, just her and Aaravos, really, I guess. It's a bit weird. But it cuts back to Cid, so like I said, I don't know how Cid remembers all these things when he wasn't actually there, but I don't know. Plot convenience, I guess. And, it goes into this sort of weird angle of the map that we didn't really get a chance to see before now, and goes back to a key part of the plot, the massive tree that had the crystals in it that we destroyed that freed Exdeath for good, and where Galuf died, and Kral is laying some flowers at his grave, and it's like, everything's, you know, back to normal, but she's still depressed because, I mean, her granddad's dead, and so that's upsetting. So, you know, she's like, I'm all alone now that my granddad's dead. I guess her parents are also dead, so, again, line of succession, she should be the queen if Galuf's gone. Unless Galuf had a wife, but that's not really mentioned at any point, so I assume not. But Galuf's moments of badassery, him climbing around inside the Earth Temple in the Ronkin ruins, flying on the Drake, and saving Kral from Exdeath. So, you know, out of everybody who want to see moments of badassery, Galuf gets the best in this ending sequence. And then, obviously, they have to show how his story ended, so his death at the end there after fighting Exdeath alone and defeating Exdeath. And, Kral finally says goodbye to Galuf, to her grandfather, and Aaravos is like, hey, what do you mean you're alone? We're all here. We're your friends. You know, we're not going to leave you behind, so, you know, you don't need to be alone just because your grandfather's dead. And they're like, yeah, you know, like, we'd forget about you after we travelled around for so long and, you know, saved the world together. You know, some level of shared trauma there in the fight against Neo Exdeath and everything, so, you know, they tell her, you know, Galuf's laughing at her, crying. And some birds come past, and, a beautiful bed of flowers grows, so, you know, she dries her tears, and they're like, well, Crystal's got their power back, now it's our turn to protect them like the Warriors of Dawn did. And, I was like, do you hear that? And Frost's like, I do. And Kral's like, what, Grandpa's voice? And Ross like, nah, it's the wind. Wind's still blowing, rippling of the water for Lena, crackling of fire for Faris, and the settling of the earth for Kral, representing their 4 crystals that they've saved throughout their journey. And, yeah, Ross like, yeah, maybe it's not just that, but... Faris like, nah, I can hear it. And Lena's like, yeah, something warm. And, they decide to essentially ride off into the sunset together, and that's basically it. That's the sort of end of the story here. So, three of them get on Chocobos, and Carl's like, no, Chocobos, pff, I've got a dragon. And so she gets on the Windrake, and they all go off together, and we get a little sequence here at the end that shows everyone's character, what level they were at the end, and what skills they had mastered, and how many job abilities, so what job she was for Mime, and then you can see all the abilities there. So as it goes through this, this was a really fun game. I really love Final Fantasy V. It's one of my favorite games in the Final Fantasy series, and so putting these videos together of this playthrough as part of the 12 game challenge was fantastic, and I really had a blast doing it. I don't necessarily have the same attachment to Final Fantasy for some of the later games in the series, and so I have got all the footage from my playthrough of Final Fantasy VI as of the time of recording this video, but I haven't been recording my playthrough of Final Fantasy VII. I will be putting up the final boss fight for that, and probably a slight commentary over the top of it to talk about my time with Final Fantasy VII, but don't expect anything for Final Fantasy VI for a little while. I'm still trying to work out exactly the best way of putting that together. I don't want to do a series like this, abridging the story and going through and explaining everything, as this was pretty time-consuming, and I don't think it's necessarily the best way of presenting it, because I don't have as much of a personal attachment to Final Fantasy VI. I can't, you know, sort of go on and on about the story in depth off the top of my head as well as I could with Final Fantasy V, so I'm going to try and put something a bit different together for that. But I have finished Final Fantasy VI, 7 is still ongoing at this point in time. Apologies for the delay in getting this last episode of Final Fantasy V out. Creative juices weren't necessarily the best, and making the cut for this video wasn't necessarily the easiest. This was almost an hour's worth of footage for this last section to begin with, and I've severely cut it down and sped some of it up, so hopefully everyone's happy to see this final episode out. I'm happy to see the final episode out, and I've got more games to play by the end of the year to finish off the 12 game challenge, so yeah, thank you all for watching through this series of Final Fantasy V. And as you can see here, Avros, our last character here, level 41 freelancer, a lot of abilities there between Monk and a bunch of other jobs that we leveled up. You can kind of see how many abilities we did master on these guys. Everyone had about 28 to 30-ish abilities mastered. A lot of them from jobs you didn't particularly see much of in the playthrough, because I did so much off-screen job level grinding. But everyone being around level 40 was a pretty low-level run for Final Fantasy V. That you can do significantly lower level runs of the game. This wasn't me trying to optimize it at as low level as possible, but this is a pretty easy Final Fantasy game if you kind of know how some of the jobs work. So if you've watched this series, I'd say go and give it a go. It's a great game, and personally one of my favorites, if not my most favorite in the series. So thank you all for watching. I'll catch you when Final Fantasy VI goes up, but for now, this is the end, so goodbye.